42nd Lightfoot Highlanders, the Black Watch, were formed after the Jacobite rebellion, first as a unit to keep order in Scotland. The regiments taken from 3 clans, loyal to the English king. These men were spread across the upper of the Isle of Britain and were of sorts a policing unit. This lasted until the 1750s, when the English thought it better to keep the armed Scots out of Scotland. Their assumed allegiance was seen as tepid. This is when the Black Watch first experienced North America, from Halifax to the Caribbean. The 42nd would spend the last half of the 18th century in North America with an 8-year assignment in Cork, Ireland from 1767 to 1775, and there eventually back to Scotland in 1789. The unit would fight in several conflicts during this time, including 3 major wars: the 7 Years' War, Pontiac's Rebellion, and the American War of Independence. Though sent a steady stream of Highlanders into their ranks from Britain, the 42nd was unusual for most British units abroad, as the ranks were also directly filled by American Scotch from the colonies of New York and New Jersey. Colonists could join the King's Army with no problem and in British regular units abroad, but in conflicts in the Americas they were almost always conscripted into provincial units separate from the regulars. This special case of the 42nd stands them apart and increases the need for us to discuss the unit in this project. This policy occurred from the events that happened after the First Battle of Ticonderoga during the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War. The 42nd brutally lost nearly half its men in an assault on Fort Ticonderoga, July of 1758. The 42nd was then consolidated in New York with the return of its 2nd Battalion from the Caribbean and conscripts from New York and New Jersey colonies, Scotch population. The loss at Fort Ticonderoga would be avenged a year later when the 42nd was among the British present at the victorious Second Battle of Fort Ticonderoga and the eventual French surrender of Montreal in September of 1760. The entire 42nd was sent later in January of 1759 to again battle in the West Indies. The Highlanders endured the failed invasion of Martinique, moving on to the successful capture of Fort Louis on the Grand Terre side of Guadeloupe. This was a costly yet valuable campaign for the British, with over 2,300 men dead, wounded, or diseased by its end, which led to 300 of the 42nd being garrisoned at Fort Louis before being relieved and sent back that spring to New York and Nova Scotia. Late in 1761, Spain ended its neutrality, signing a compact with France, complicating the war for the British High Command. In response, January 1762, the 42nd received orders to begin readying and boarding ships of a massive 202-ship British fleet, carrying an expeditionary force of 31,000 men for a siege on the important Spanish maritime power of Havana, Cuba. The successful capture of the large port lasted from March to August of that year. The 42nd, among most of the British participants, were praised for this crippling blow to the Spanish involvement in the conflict. Pontiac's Rebellion, 1763. Fort Pitt was built by British forces between 1759 and 1761 during the French and Indian War, at the confluence of the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers, where the Ohio River is formed in western Pennsylvania, modern-day Pittsburgh. It was near, but not directly on, the site of Fort Duquesne, a French colonial fort built in 1754 as tensions increased between Great Britain and France in both Europe and North America. Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa tribe formed the Confederation of Tribes to resist the westward expansion of the British colonists. This confederation laid siege to Fort Pitt, now Pittsburgh, PA, at the foot of the Allegheny Mountains in western Pennsylvania. The 42nd Black Watch was sent to relieve Fort Pitt. Under the overall command of Colonel Henry Bouquet, the 42nd fought at Bushy Run in Pennsylvania, August 5th through 6th, 1763. Allied with some warriors of the divided Delaware, Shawnee, Mingo, and Huron tribes, they took on a large force of Pontiac's newly formed confederation, attempting to stop Bouquet's column from relieving Fort Pitt, which Pontiac had under siege. The British, including the 42nd, won the engagement and dispersed Pontiac's interception force. The 42nd and Company continued on relieving Fort Pitt, a strategic thorn in the side of the Confederation, and swinging an advantage back to the British in the war for the Great Lakes region.